So is this core rulebook stratagem slightly underrated in the scheme of Warhammer 40k? Let's talk through the finer points of flinging high explosives in the general direction of the enemy. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking core stratagems once more, and in this video I thought we'd do a focused look at the grenade stratagem, talk through its rules which maybe are a little bit more obtuse than you might guess from a first read, and a few of the situations in game where I genuinely think that it has very good value, and it's generally worth being aware of for the option to have some big swings in game. Grenades in 10th edition have taken a rather different form to in previous ones. In 7th edition and prior, crack grenades were often used to get things like strength 6 attacks in melee against vehicles, and frag grenades could help you out when charging it into enemies dug into terrain. If you had a squad with frag grenades, then it meant that you might be able to strike on normal initiative steps as opposed to the dug in unit fighting first. That all got a bit of an overhaul in 8th and 9th edition 40k though. Games Workshop changed it so they put grenades on the unit weapon profile, meaning that they could be thrown at short range, but only one character in each unit could use a grenade unless you had some sort of fancy stratagem to do things like throw Deathcore of Krieg gas bombs en masse. That was certainly something that happened. Weirdly enough, it often meant that characters were particularly happy to throw grenades given that they were one model units back in 8th edition, but it maybe did feel just a little bit clunky having to add an extra stat line to every single unit. It was a rule that was maybe at least kind of commonly forgotten, given that it doesn't really add you all that much damage output, but it could help a bit. In 10th edition though, Games Workshop changed things around once again. Grenades became a stratagem, and while it's maybe not a mainstay of strength in 40k, I feel like it's genuinely a handy enough one to have as an option. Basically some pop-up damage that isn't dependent on the rest of your army can genuinely be absolutely game-changing in the right circumstances. Maybe in a good place for a stratagem overall, not auto-use, but situationally quite good. Here's the grenade stratagem from the core book. It's a war gear stratagem. It costs 1 command point and you use it in your shooting phase. The unit that is using it must have the grenade keyword, so it's definitely far more relevant to certain armies than others, and even then far more meaningful for units that have lots of infantry as opposed to lots of vehicles. You can use it with any unit that you've got that hasn't been selected to shoot this phase, and that's an interesting kind of distinction that I'll get onto in just a second. But when you've selected your unit, you get to throw your grenade at 8-inch range, targeting one enemy unit, kind of similar to shooting, that's both visible to the unit and also not an engagement range. Unlike standard shooting attacks though, it does mean that you could have the unit visible to one person, even if it wasn't actually visible to the unit that's actually within 8-inch range, which is a bit weird, but also kind of is a bit lore appropriate at the same time. Maybe one squad mate calling out for another to fling a grenade over a piece of terrain or something. Then when the grenade lands, you get to roll 6d6. For each 4+ that you roll, you get 1 mortal wound on your target. So basically the grenade stratagem can give you between 0 and 6 mortal wounds, but with average rolling, if you use it turn on turn, you'll get an average of 3. In general, it's at least fairly straightforward and effective, but there are some slight subtleties. First up, I would bear in mind it's not a battle tactic, so no getting it free with captains or anything equivalent like that. But perhaps the most interesting bit of the rules is that you absolutely can use this on certain units that wouldn't be able to shoot normally, say for example a unit that's advanced or one that's fallen back. Even if the language of the wording I feel like does kind of imply that it's a unit that should have been able to shoot normally, but that isn't what Games Workshop's actually written. I feel like that's one really quite powerful thing, where say if you had an isolated conflict on the board, you say had one unit that absolutely had to fall back, otherwise they were just going to die in combat, you've still actually got a way that can damage the enemy units that were just hounding you, if it makes sense to have a go at dealing some mortal wounds. It's also really quite nice for a unit advancing. Say you wanted a unit to move really fast to get onto an objective. I recently played against someone who was using it with Outriders, using a big 18-inch move to get the Outriders onto an objective and maybe with unusual lines of sight, and then strongly considering firing off a grenade to make sure that they hit the other unit to make sure it had less objective control than they did. You can also use grenades while you're doing certain secondary type action things as well, say for example cleansing on a midfield objective or deploying a teleport homer or something like that. Again, it just allows a bit of damage when your unit wouldn't normally be able to do it, as it's not technically a shooting attack. Overall, I feel like it's actually kind of flexible with the ways that you can use it. at least for units that are going to be going around on the front line and skirmishing with the enemy. If you've got infantry up close that are maybe surviving in remnants, you might still be able to use it somehow. I feel like for its power, it's maybe seen as a little bit of a newbie stratagem just due to ease of use. It's perhaps as easy and direct to see the advantage of. Literally pay 1 CP and get damage on the enemy unit. If you don't really understand the subtleties of Warhammer 40k, certainly easy to get value out of that, even if you don't understand a few of the other stratagems. I would say that if you're using it just literally for pure damage, I'd say it's alright, but not standout. Obviously, it's kind of swingy, so you can't 100% rely on it to do anything. The odds on to get 3 mortal wounds, and even more reliably so to get 2, though you can always roll low. I feel like 3 mortal wounds against the right target could well be worth 1 CP. It's not quite as high yield as, say, tank shock on something with a massive strength characteristic, where you might well be getting 4 to 6. Often I'd say that 3 extra wounds on the target might not equal things like a big core damage dealer unit getting, say, a +1 to wounds, or big rerolls from a detachment specific stratagem. But if you compared it to, say, quite a common one for a command point reroll, rerolling a damage result of 1 on a d6 damage, the grenade does actually average slightly more damage out of that. You get 3 wounds on your target via a grenade, whereas the rerolling the 1 would only average you 2.5 extra, so the two are fairly comparable value there. Perhaps one slightly imperfect way to look at the value of it is to see how many points of enemy you kill with it. It's perhaps not so great against things like medium or lighter infantry. You kill about 20 points worth of guardsmen or 25 points of standard space marines, depending on the exact unit. It's kind of nicer against heavier infantry though. One Terminator might be, say, 37 points depending on faction. 3 wounds to a Predator tank is about 33, or 3 wounds to a Mighty Land Raider is more like 45. Kind of makes sense there, as you generally pay more points per wound if it's a massive toughness 12 wound with a 2+ save, compared with lighter protection. Generally, if you're mainly just helping it to destroy the enemy army, you want to target the tough stuff with grenades. I feel like in practice, though, the actual situations that you get into might just yield places where you can have massively more value than that. I sort of feel like grenades have some sort of parallels with indirect fire sort of things, where it could just be pop-up damage that can hit anything within certain limitations around your infantry units. Often it might not be worth the CP, or you might need it for something else, but sometimes it absolutely would be. Running through just a few situations where I think that grenades get you more value. I think they're pretty great if they get you a particularly big swing in the game. Say, for example, if you destroy an enemy model that was directly just about to destroy lots of your models, then you're both removing enemy threat and saving yours at the same time. It's perhaps a bit more impactful than just destroying something that maybe wasn't as big of a threat. I feel like it's particularly nice in an isolated fight, maybe somewhere on the board where they don't have much support. Say, for example, if you had, say, 8 guardsmen squaring off against 2 Terminators as the last remnants of 2 squads. By blasting apart one of the Terminators with a grenade, it means that the other one probably at least isn't going to wipe out the entire squad in one turn, and you might be able to get lucky enough with some special weapons and things to down the other if you were rolling hot. Otherwise, if the extra damage is what's needed to swing a primary objective from enemy control to yours, again that's going to be great value, potentially costing your opponent something like 5 victory points there on a good day. Say, after most of your shooting was done, the unit on the objective could throw grenades to try and take some enemy models off it if they weren't able to charge because they'd advanced or something. Otherwise, it's going to be extra powerful if grenades are the only way that you can deal damage to a unit. Say again, if you're in an isolated sort of fight and your unit had to fall back, grenades might be literally your only option to take care of that enemy. The one command point could be worth it to get that damage exactly where it needs to be on the board, particularly if it's destroying something very important. Finally, I think it's also going to be nicer as well if you get to the end of your shooting phase and you say you've got something that you just got lucky and survived on a couple of wounds left. Say you had loads of shooting and you almost killed an enemy Land Raider that was just on 2 wounds left, and there wasn't a way to kill it in close combat or anything like that. Perhaps a grenade could be a last-ditch Hail Mary to try and blow something up that was just about to do some big damage to you in the next turn. Again, that could be probably one of the biggest ways to get a swing in the game. I feel like you're maybe going to be using grenades for those sort of purposes a bit more if you're playing an army that's maybe a little bit more tricky with a lot of scouty or vanguardy sort of units. Maybe a little bit less to threaten tough stuff, so grenades could be extra helpful for punching through things with good armor. On the flip side, probably worth thinking when the grenade stratagem is something that you could do but is probably a bad idea. Probably the most obvious is when you're just dealing redundant damage. Probably not one to just throw at the absolute start of the shooting phase into whatever big scary thing that you're trying to kill this phase, and then just shooting with your big tank destroyer, and realizing that getting a good roll, you just would have killed it with overkill to spare anyway, and you've just completely wasted a command point on the grenade. Definitely worth trying to save as late as possible if you can. Otherwise, if it's your last CP and there's a potential better stratagem that you have in mind, it's often worth keeping a command point in the bank if you're going to be charging things later in the turn. You don't want to spend your last CP and then unexpectedly roll a 3 for a charge on something that was absolutely pivotal. So certainly take a look at what you're going to be charging and make sure that that's not going to ruin things. And perhaps in particular that the damage done by the grenade stratagem isn't going to make your charge far longer. I'd also maybe be a bit iffy about it, even if you could do good damage with it, but the change isn't really going to be impactful for the next turn. Say for example just throwing a grenade into a big scary 10-man unit and reducing the squad size down to 8. Admittedly, you might have done some okay damage in points to the unit, but you probably haven't degraded its function meaningfully. It'll still probably kill what it needs to kill. I guess not the worst to stack on a bit of damage for later turns, but compared with destroying something and actually meaning that it doesn't hit you back and getting that swing in the game, it just doesn't seem like it to be quite as impactful. There's a fair few units out there in the game that can get free grenade stratagems, things like the Biologist Putrefier or the Reductus Saboteur for the Genestealer cult. Both of those are really quite competitive models for their factions. The Biologist Putrefier is often seen leading squads of Plague Marines. It means that if you did budget a command point for a grenade stratagem, you could be throwing 2 of them, one from a squad with him in, and maybe one from another Plague Marine squad getting out of the same Rhino. Add on better lethal hits to all the models in the unit, and a whole bunch of hyperbolic grenade shots with sort of heavy bolter shots up close. And maybe not too hard to see why he's a very strong support character for Plague Marines venturing into the midfield. I feel like other units that can maybe make the grenade stratagem even more scary are things that can follow up on it with even more mortal wounds. Say for example, the Assault Intercessors with jump packs I think are quite a good one for that. With these guys they could bound forwards really quite a long way, maybe a good 12 inches, even advance if they were in Stormlance or Gladius and the Assault Doctrine maybe. Throw a grenade for 1 CP for an average of 3 mortal wounds, and if they can follow that up with a charge and then they'd average an extra 2 or 3 mortal wounds from that just from impact hits, they basically got an average of almost 6 mortal wounds worth of damage being dealt there. That does feel like it could actually change the way that you play them. And they could genuinely go after much more heavily armoured things than their weapon profiles would suggest. Pretty crazy that these guys could potentially be taking down a squad of 3 Terminators with some fairly average rolling, between 2 sets of mortal wounds and their plasma pistols plus power fist attack. Overall though, I feel like grenades can be a handy enough stratagem in the right situation. There probably isn't one to actually go out with the game plan to use literally every single turn, unless your army's got kind of low value stratagems otherwise. I think it's value of how much use it's going to be, partly in how many of your units have grenades, so where you have options to throw them. Certainly some armies, like maybe some foot guard type armies, might have all sorts. Look out for how good the targets are in the enemy army, either very heavily armoured stuff or situational stuff that's going to have big impact. And it'd also depend on exactly what else you need to plan to spend those command points on, whether you've got absolutely pivotal game-changing ones that are far more worthwhile than grenades. Maybe say things like Chaos Space Marines have particularly strong stratagems that they absolutely love, or whether their other stratagems are a bit more tame and less impactful or game-changing. Overall, for the most part, I'd rate them as just a stratagem to keep in the back of your mind in the shooting phase, and they could be a really genuine way to take down an important enemy unit, or cripple one to the extent where it can't just immediately kill your unit straight back. See whether it's going to actually be worth the command point to spend that anywhere in the shooting phase, and it could potentially even change the way that you play certain units. Maybe say a unit advancing onto an objective could actually swing the point if they throw in a grenade to deal damage, or it could affect the order in which you shoot units, maybe firing off everything that's a bit further away from the enemy first before deciding whether or not you want to fire a grenade before you shoot the unit that's right next to them. Could just be one to defer to a little bit later so you have the information of plenty of other guns. In any case, let me know what you think of the grenade stratagem in Warhammer 40k 10th. Do you find yourself using it quite a lot, or do you play one of the armies where it's just not really a thing? There aren't many Necrons and Tyranids throwing grenades around after all, I guess. Look forward to hearing your thoughts down in the comments below. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more like this. I do tend to post new 40k videos just about every day, and there'll be plenty more on the way. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description if you'd like to help support and keep these videos coming. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.